This video is brought to you by MoviePalette.com and enter ROOM15 for 15% off of your palette. Hey horror fans, welcome back to Room 237, back with another review. As I continue my run through of films based on real life serial killers, and this is one based on a killer that I have not done yet during this run through, but I have reviewed one other film based on him quite a while ago. Probably one of the biggest films based on a real life serial killer. But this is another one from the 2000s. This was from 2009. And I think I found a new category, or a new category on the spectrum of these real life serial killer films. Where way down at the bottom, we have Uwe Lamel. Way up at the top, we have stuff like Netflix's Dahmer series, stuff very well made, very accurate, very well acted. And then in between, you might have some Hollywood films like Monster, the TV movies that are really good. But I think I found one that's just above Uwe Lamel. It's not quite as bad, but these can all be grouped because put up by the same production company, Barnholtz Entertainment. They are from the same director, Michael Pfeiffer, which I think I've reviewed at least one of his already. And this is another one of his, but he's also directed the Boston Strangler one with David Faustino that I have, Chicago Massacre, Richard Speck, which I have. I think he did the Hillside Strangler one that I just reviewed. No, that or he did the Kane Hodder BTK. I don't remember. Not quite as bad as Uwe Lamel, but still really not that good. And this is another one of his. And it's 2009's Drifter, Henry Lee Lucas. Now, just looking at the cover, I thought, okay, this is going to be another piece of shit. This is going to be a really bad, really inaccurate, just poorly made film. Which part of that is true. Now, I went into this into this thinking that this was going to be wildly inaccurate. Now, the reason why I would think that is because when it comes to Henry Lee Lucas, there's not a whole lot that we know. I mean, if you go on Netflix and watch a very good documentary, The Confession Killer, which is what he's known as, he really only has 3 confirmed kills, and just known to just tell stories, confess to things he didn't do, always changing his story, which is why when you look at an older film loosely based on him, Henry Portrait of a Serial Killer, much better movie. This is a film that depicts a week in the life of Henry Lee Lucas with Otis Toole, but it's completely fictional. It's almost like a hypothetical. Like, this is what could have happened during any given week in the life of Henry Lee Lucas, because we really just don't know. So I thought this was kind of going to take advantage of that, but be a bad version of it. But I was actually kind of impressed because, as far as the backstory, his arrest, his relationships with people, the way the confessions and the investigation unfolds, everything we know about Lucas is actually pretty accurate. I do have to give this movie that. It is well done as far as telling the story of Henry Lee Lucas that we know. But when it comes to his murder spree and him killing his victims, that's when it gets more fictional. It doesn't even have the 3 that we know. Well, it has 2 of the 3. The third and final one, it doesn't even mention. But I do have a lot of problems with this. It's not a good movie. Probably the biggest issue I have is the casting, which I find laughable and I'll get to. But I mean, it's not even shot very well. I mean, it has... I can't say anything about the music. It has a couple cool songs, like this one really happy, kind of folky country song during a montage of his and Otis's killing spree. But not just the casting, but the acting is really bad. The southern accents are almost parodic. Uh, a lot of things are just laughable. There's even a scene with electroshock therapy where there's no sound effects. The guy just takes the thing with the pads on it, puts it on Henry's head, and you can literally just see him going to make it look like it's vibrating. And there's no buzzing, no electricity, just Henry making noises. So, I mean, the production value is very low. Again, not nearly as bad as like a Uwe Lamel film, but I would say the Kane Hodder BTK film is better made than this. But if this is a sign of things to come, that BTK, then I'm really nervous to get to his Richard Speck film, his Boston Strangler film, which the Boston Strangler film I don't even think is about Albert DeSalvo, the killer. I think it's about what if he was innocent and we're going to focus on this other guy, which why? But anyway, so as far as the film goes, yeah, directed by Michael Pfeiffer, also produced by Pfeiffer, written by Pfeiffer, Wood, Dickinson, and Christopher Ryan, music by Andre Bolton, sound by Andre Bolton, Hank Baumer Jr. did the cinematography, Yvonne Wang was the head of the makeup department, and we have Antonio Sabato Jr. as Lucas. I'm actually going to have to go on IMDb for this because I did recognize some people, kind of like the Uwe Lamel films. I think these Barnholtz films reuses actors. One of BTK's victims in the Kane Hodder film, she's in this as Lucas's mother. The DA that comes in to debunk all of his confessions, he was the lead detective in the BTK film. John Burke as DA Farino. Yeah, he was also in that. Kelly Curran as Becky. Costas Sommer as Otis. And again, all three of them, I really have an issue with the casting. No one else. Jay Pickett as Officer Dollinger. I think he was in another one of those films. John Deal as Sheriff Larrabee. Kaya Coley as Viola Lucas. She was the one that was in the BTK film. But yeah, I really did not recognize anybody else. Did he direct the Corin Nemec Bundy film? I think he might have. Which, if he did, that's the best film that I've seen of his. And even that one's not... Yeah, he did. Even that one's not great, but... So, the way this film's set up, so it opens up in... I think 1980... It says 1983 when he kills Becky Powell, his underage girlfriend, or wife, posing as wife at that time. Also, fellow serial killer Otis Toole's niece. It shows him killing her. Then we bounce back to 1981 for something, and then we jump back up to 83 when he turns himself in, and he just starts confessing. And then, told through flashbacks, we kind of get his backstory. So it's kind of like one of those bullet point films, though I wouldn't say the life of Henry Lee Lucas is as well known as, say, the story of Dahmer. You know, with Dahmer, you can kind of pick out, okay, Stephen Hicks, dumbbell, uh, stolen mannequin, Lionel trying to get into the locked box, the bathhouses, uh, Conrad synthesophone. You know, there's all these things almost everyone knows. I don't really think Henry Lee Lucas has a lot of things like that, but it does show his awful childhood, which I do want to point out. As I said in my review for Monster, where people like to talk about Eileen Warnos, about how she's this lost angel, this poor soul, this poor sweet baby angel that had an awful childhood. It's not her fault. She just wanted to be loved. This guy had a terrible childhood. It goes into some detail. You know, it shows his mother, Viola, who is a prostitute. It doesn't go as far as making him watch her with her clients and beating him if he doesn't watch. But it shows her beating him, making him wear a dress to school. It doesn't show the instance where his father bought him a bike and then she sold it. Which it shows his father with no legs as he was hit by a train. Again, his backstory is fairly accurate. I will give it the credit for that. It hints to his torturing of animals, how him and his brother were playing with sticks and he got one to his eye. That's why one eye is kind of always like this. Shows him getting his glass eye, his mother not caring to take him to the doctor. His early life of crime, and eventually when he meets Otis Toole. There's no real dates or text saying where we are, because he was on like a cross-country drift. Even though the film makes it look like he never really went outside Texas, save for Florida, when he met Toole. And, then a little bit of the scenes with him, Otis, and Becky, it feels like a lesser Rob Zombie film. It's not as vulgar. It's more laughable. But you have these three people with these over-the-top southern accents out in like the deep, deserty Texas South, going around killing people. Becky not being quite as obnoxious as, say, Baby. But it does feel like a lesser... Devil's Rejects. And now I want to get into the casting. So, Antonio Sabato Jr. as Lucas and Costas Sommer as Otis Toole. Now, it seems like maybe they cast them for their acting abilities. I didn't see it. They weren't very good. This seems like a case where they were cast for their looks. Almost like they're trying to make sexy versions, trying to cast good-looking guys for the role because they're the leads. Now, people had an issue with that with Evan Peters and Dahmer, but with this, if there's... In the world of serial killers, the last two, you want to cast someone based on good looks, or because you want them to be good-looking. It's Henry Lee Lucas and Otis Toole. Two of the most homely, sketchy-looking serial killers ever. I mean, yeah, there's other ones like Jacques Kroll and guys like that, but these two were very homely looking. So why they cast these two guys, I have no idea. I mean, if it was just Antonio Sabato Jr., maybe I could have suspended my disbelief a little bit. But this Costas Summer as Otis, that was when I just lost it. As soon as he came on camera, I was like, do not tell me that's Otis Toole. And it was. And I've heard people pronounce his name differently. It's spelled Otis, but, I'm pretty sure it's Otis. That's how I've always heard it. That's how I've always said it. So not only did these guys look completely not right for the role, it almost makes it look not quite parodic, but like they're not taking it seriously. But then you get their performances, especially Costas Summer as Tool. His performance is just complete comedic uh, buffoonery. That's and I did not enjoy any scenes when he was on camera. They really did not depict Tool at all, what he was like in real life, which I'll get to. Uh, but yeah, so the casting was absolutely horrible. I mean, even the supporting characters, like the guys on the sheriff's department or the DA guy, they weren't terrible, but they weren't really worth it. I guess they were serviceable, if anything. But those two guys I really had an issue with more than anything. I could not buy them as Lucas and Tool, especially Tool. And on top of that, they were just bad actors, so that didn't really help it either. So, and before I get too far, this is actually not the first film loosely based on Lucas and his confessions. Because that's kind of what I thought this was going to be about. I thought it was going to be, him drifting and then sort of him killing people based on the confessions that the real Lucas gave, or the confessions that we know about. Like the girl known as Orange Socks. The naked girl found wearing only orange socks. She's not mentioned in this. In fact, the only one they really debunk is this one from Oklahoma City, but he was linked to four in Oklahoma City. Um, so that's what I thought it was going to be, but it is more like the life of Henry Lee Lucas. But there was actually a film before Portrait called Confessions of a Serial Killer, where the cover is a guy with like the long gray hair, the Hannibal mask. That was built around the confessions as well. I do not own the sequel to Portrait. I've seen it once. I don't remember much about it. I remember it not being very good. And then I think just this one. So, I mean, uh, I was gonna say we're kind of due for a good Lucas movie, but then again, this gets his backstory as accurate as I guess it could be. But there are some really good documentaries. I mean, of course, I really just have these where he's just featured in like short segments, but his Confession Killer documentary on Netflix, very well done, very solid. Of course, there won't be a DVD of it because Netflix doesn't release shit. But, and then of course, about 24 encyclopedic books, which actually, he's on the cover of the first edition of this encyclopedia. So, yeah, I'm not really sure what else to say about, overall thoughts of the film. Other than, yeah, it's just very poorly made, poorly acted. It doesn't feel like the 70s or 80s. I mean, and the costume department, it literally looks like brand new overalls and like a cowboy hat. It almost looks like a comedy or a sitcom where someone's dressing up like a stereotypical Texan or something. But so yeah, this might be the most accurate according to film about Lucas, but it's nowhere near as good, effective, or well made as Portrait. And so now, as always, before I get into the film and the story it tells and compare it, and just sort of a brief clip notes on the killer himself. Henry Lee Lucas, also known as the Confession Killer, was born August 23rd, 1936, and while drifting across the American South in the 1970s, he murdered numerous people, an unknown number of people. Some with his notorious accomplice and friend, fellow serial killer Otis Toole, which their friendship lasted between 76 and 82, with their killing relationship lasting between 79 and 82. He earned his moniker after turning himself in, which was after he found God, in Texas, when he started confessing to increasingly high murders, going from 60 to 300 to 600 till eventually 3,000 across the country he confessed to. It was soon learned that he was lying to get some sort of compensation, such as cigarettes, milkshakes, and being on TV and in the papers, and also being able to leave his cell, go outside, and show them where he left the bodies, which often they were not there. uh, so he ended up making a complete farce of the Williamson County Sheriff's Department and later recanted all of his confessions, especially after his the timeline of his work history started to show that some of his confessions were impossible and were disputing his claims. Now, despite his high confession numbers and number of years he drifted and supposedly killed, he's only really known for 3 actually confirmed kills: his mother, his underage girlfriend slash wife, Becky Powell, and the 80-year-old Kate Rich, which was his last victim. Though he was suspected of 8 more and was convicted on all 11 and was sentenced to death in 1983. However, in 1998, he received clemency from George W. Bush, who was governor of Texas, and this was actually the only death row inmate that Bush gave clemency to, and died of congestive heart failure in 2001 at the age of 64. Though I have read other sources that said it was cirrhosis of the liver, similar to Otis Toole in 1996. Now, he had a rough childhood with physical and, in some ways, sexual abuse from his mother. He tortured animals and would become a sexual sadist, often practicing necrophilia on his victims and actually preferring that to live consensual sex. It was never revealed how many victims he actually had, and it led many to think of him as either the most prolific serial killer ever, or just a drifting loser who would confess to anything to get what he wanted and to be famous. And so now we come to the film itself, and I will say again, when it comes to his killing spree, obviously that's fabricated. It doesn't even go over the 3 confirmed kills that we know of. But when it comes to his backstory, it's actually fairly accurate, and I do have to commend it for that. So, it shows him killing Becky in the very beginning. It says 1983, but he killed her in 1982 by stabbing her in the field, which is true. And she was Otis's young niece. But then after and I don't remember if it shows him going in to turn himself in or him getting arrested. If I remember correctly, he turned himself in. But, yeah, it says he confessed to killing her on August 24th of 82. Or, he confessed to killing her, that's what the actual date was. And also said that he practiced necrophilia on her. Oh, wait, no, he didn't say that. I've got my notes all frigged up. I apologize. He killed her on August 24th of 82 and then practiced necrophilia on her and cut her up into 9 pieces, spread her all around the field. Now, later on in the film, he does say he cut her up into 9 pieces and spread her across Texas. No one will make her whole again. I think that is an actual quote from Lucas that I've heard or read somewhere. So then we jump back to 81. I don't remember what it shows in 81. I think just him, Otis, and Becky driving around. And then we go back to 83 when he's in San Antonio, Texas. And him just, outside showing the Rangers where the bodies are. Which, of course, they're not there. But it does show him with the cigarettes and his milkshakes, which was really all he asked for. But then they start asking him about his life, and this is when we get the flashbacks. So then we jump back to, and again, it doesn't give dates. Um, I don't remember how old he was when he lost his eye. I think he was 9 or 10. The the boy, or maybe he was younger. Maybe he was like 5 or 6. So this has to be around 40, 41. Again, it doesn't say, but it shows him back in West Virginia where he was born, and it shows his mother being a prostitute, his father with no legs, mentions he lost them after being hit by a train, shows his mother beating him. For a glimpse, it shows him holding some animal, which is clearly a stuffed animal with some sort of red jelly all over it to make it look skinned. Now, we see her with a few clients, but we never see her forcing him to watch. But we do get a scene where he's sent to school in a dress and all the kids make fun of him. Now, and torturing animals wasn't the only thing he did with the animals. An uncle or a cousin taught him how to do other things with dead animals, things he would go on to do with dead bodies later on. It shows him and his older brother playing with sticks, gets one in his eye, his mother not caring enough to take him to the doctor, but he does go to the doctor, gets a glass eye, which is true, that did happen. It shows that they live in squalor with like no food, no electricity, no running water, which he did have very poor living conditions as well. So then, I think they're just asking what killing is like. Back to the interrogation, and he says it's like an urge, kind of like when you're hungry. And it just shows this random going to a woman's house, asking for water, then he stabs and strangles her. But then he tells the story of his first victim. Now, the film depicts it as what he says he was 15, it was his first girlfriend. He tried to kiss her, have sex with her, she wouldn't let him. So he tried strangling her, then he stabbed her. Now, in real life, this was in 1951 when he was 17. No, that's not right. That is 15. I did my math wrong earlier. So he was 15. But I guess it was a 17-year-old girl that he abducted from a bus stop, in which she refused his advances. He killed her. But he later recanted this, along with everything else. It shows he's picked up for burglary and sent to a delinquent, sort of like a juvie work crew. Shows him escaping, which is true. But later on, as an adult, he would escape from jail again, but turn himself in. So then we jump to when... that was in 1952, so he would have been 16. So then we jump to when he killed his mother, and this is fairly accurate for the most part. It shows him living in Michigan, Viola showing up drunk, saying, "You need to come back to West Virginia." He says no. They get in an argument, and then she starts beating him up. He stabs her in the neck, leaves her. In real life, there was an argument. She hit him over the head with a broom handle, and then he fatally stabbed her. She was found on the floor, whereas in the film she's left on the stairs. He allegedly had sex with her dead body, and then he was picked up for the murder of his mother. The film mentions that he served 10 years, which is true. He was sentenced to 20 to 40, but he was paroled after 10. But it shows his suicide attempt by slashing his wrists, going to a mental facility. I don't know if he got shock treatment. I don't remember reading anything about that. But that's when we get that laughable scene with no sound effects, and he's just going like this. It doesn't... the film depicts it as torture. Like, it's a sadistic doctor that is being like, you're still not compliant. You must have more, even though he's docile. It doesn't mention that he was there for 4 years, or his schizophrenic slow type diagnosis. But it does say that he went back to prison and was paroled after 10 years, a full 10-year term. So that's true. It says he met Otis Toole at a soup kitchen, which is true. It was 1976. They don't really give dates, as I said. So it shows how they met. And again, I do not like the guy that played Otis. He does not look at all like him. He looks more... He kind of somewhat looks like the guy from, like, Murder Set Pieces. So why they got someone like him to play homely-ass Otis Toole, I have no idea. But he's just doing this comedic, over-the-top Southern accent. It's sort of acted dumb, almost like a Larry the Cable Guy character or something. He says that Otis, most people he killed, he ate, which he did practice cannibalism. Now, this does not depict Otis at all like his real-life counterpart. This depicts them as two buddies going around to rape and kill together. Which they did, but Otis was actually a homosexual. He did have a wife for a period, but, you know, they did have sort of a lover's relationship as well, Henry and Otis, to the point where when Henry would rape a female victim or even have sex with her dead body, Otis would go into a frenzy. Or if the woman was still alive, Otis would go into a frenzy and just completely just go nuts on her. So he would have angry jealousy whenever Henry would do stuff like that to a female victim. The film doesn't depict any of that. Excuse me. So then the DA, cut back to 83, DA arrives and says, hey, we have his work history, a timeline for a Florida roofing company, which puts him here when he supposedly killed a woman in Oklahoma City that he confessed to. Now, that is true. His work history did disprove a lot of his confessions, and found out there's just no feasible way he could have made it there and back, and his work timeline really debunked a lot of his confessions. So that was which the DA really wants to put an end to his confessing. It depicts the sheriff's department as, well, we're going along with it so we can, so we can look like we're solving these murders and, stuff like that. And he was linked to 4 in Oklahoma City, or confessed to 4 in Oklahoma City. So then they go on to talk about Becky, which her real name was Frida. Becky was more, I think, Henry's nickname for her. They asked how old she was, and he said he didn't know. He says, well, she didn't seem 12, 14. I mean, she was an old soul. She was 12 when they... Well, she was... So if he met Otis and Becky in 76... So she was 9 when he met her. But they got romantically involved when she was 12. They were together until she was 15, which is when he killed her. And she was said to have been slow. Maybe she didn't realize what was going on. Or really have the know-how to fight back or know what was wrong. But, yeah. Frida Becky Powell was underage. And he called her his wife, especially when after they left Otis and were trying to live together in this one part of Texas. So it shows Henry leaving Otis with Becky, which is true, sometime in '82, I believe. And it shows Otis being really mad, but it doesn't go further than that. Now, supposedly, Otis would be so enraged by this that he would start his own killing spree, or this led to his own killing spree, leading him to be a serial killer in his own right, not just Lucas's partner. Killing 9 more people across 6 states, including, allegedly, Adam Walsh. I don't think that was ever proven, even though he did write a letter to John Walsh saying what he did. I think he's widely accepted as the killer of Adam Walsh. Some people think Dahmer did it. I've kind of always subscribed to the idea that it could have been Toole. So then he finally gets into the death of Becky, which, it shows her being homesick for Florida. Big argument between the two. They pull over in a field, and Henry stabs her. That's pretty true to real life. Which, they were driving around. It was Denton, Texas, August 24th of '82. She was homesick. I think she was starting to make a scene, then they drove off, pulled into the field. He was telling everyone that she was his wife. And after he killed her, the film doesn't show it, but it mentions it. Well, it doesn't mention the necrophilia, but cutting her up into 9 pieces, spreading her across the field. And so then we just have this end scene where Henry admits to the DA that he's lying. Pretty much like, how stupid do you have to be? 3,000 murders in the last 2 years? Like, that's, even at 7 days a week, that's not enough. And the guy says, something about God. He says he is God. He says who lives, who dies. I had everything I wanted while I was drifting. Food, cigarettes, color TV. Pretty much praising his life and everything he did. And the speech he gives doesn't sound too far off from some stuff that he was known to say back then. And then it just fades to black with the end text of saying, Otis died cirrhosis of the liver in '96 while serving 6 life sentences in Florida, which is true. And then it says, Henry, it says Henry was sentenced to death, but then Governor Bush gave him clemency in '98, and it says he died of natural causes, but... So I was surprised that there was no mention of Kate Rich, the 80-year-old woman that I think he was living on her property when they got to that area of Texas where he killed Becky after they left Otis. And, he was doing work for her around the house, working, I think, around the church that I think she was a part of. And so then after Becky went missing, he asked 80-year-old Kate Rich to help him look for her. He went to a campground in Ringgold, Texas, and that was where he killed her. He stabbed her and stuffed her in a drainage pipe. And then later on, he retrieved her and put her in some stove that was in like a junkyard outside and burned her remains. But then he turned himself in '83. Supposedly, because he was an alcoholic, supposedly he was going through DTs. He had some sort of, he was part of the church, and he got this message from God saying he had to turn himself in. Film doesn't really go into that. I was surprised it didn't mention Kate Rich. It mentioned his mother, Becky, no Kate Rich, no orange socks. I was surprised, no orange socks. Probably the most famous of his, supposed unconfirmed victims that have been linked to him. So yeah, it's better than an Uwe Lamel film, definitely. But I would definitely have to put this whole Barnholtz, directed by Michael Pfeiffer, group of films just a notch above Uwe Lamel, which the Cora Nemec Bundy movie isn't terrible. BTK wasn't terrible. Um, this might be the worst one I've seen of his, but it's just not well shot, not well made, not well acted at all, not well cast either. Um, and the whole appeal of it, of showing him being this drifter, going on this killing spree, it doesn't really do that a whole lot. There's a couple, like a montage with Otis, them picking up this one woman, then raping and killing her in a junkyard, I think it was. That's really it. That's all we get of the drifter Henry Lee Lucas. Other than that, it's built around flashbacks during an interrogation. But I do have to commend it. All the factual stuff about his backstory, how he met Otis, stuff with Becky, uh, this some of the jail time that he served, death of his mother, the abuse he endured as a child. All the stuff we know, it actually got it fairly accurate, or pretty accurate. So I was impressed by that. That's well done. But if it wasn't for that, it would have been just barely a notch above an Uwe Lamel film. Obviously, it's better shot, acted, and looking than an Uwe Lamel film, but not by much. Yeah, I would. Of all the ones I've seen by Pfeiffer so far, despite the amount of accuracy that's in it, I might have to put this at the bottom. Just as far as, how good of a movie it is, how well made it is. Putting accuracy aside, I might have to put this at the bottom. Even the completely fictional BTK film, I actually thought was better made than this. But so yeah, it's definitely no Henry Portrait of a Serial Killer. I mean, you're kind of always gonna get largely fabricated films when it comes to Lucas. So I would just recommend a completely fictional week. Which, I mean, actually, if you put these two together, you might get a decent sort of idea of Henry Lee Lucas. His backstory, the factual events, and sort of his arrest and everything. This is more of what his random spree was like. Which, the film doesn't really show that. It shows him stabbing or strangling all his victims, where in reality, he did everything. He didn't have an MO. So the film doesn't really touch on that either. But, yeah, this is way better. Way, way, way better. This is just a great, effective horror film. The only thing going for it is some of the accuracy. I still can't wrap my mind around the casting of Antonio Sabato Jr. and Costas Summer as Lucas and Toole. Two guys cast them for their good looks as two of the homeliest serial killers ever. Yeah, but not a good film despite its accuracy. But I do have a few more to get to as we start to near the end of November, so stay tuned for those, and thank you for watching.